Now let's move on to the college application process, and specifically, how do colleges make decisions? So why are we talking about this? Well, there's a lot of anxiety in the college application process, and I think a lot of it comes from the unknown, that big black box that what happens after you submit your application. So I think the more you can get an understanding of what schools are looking at, what are they looking for, and the factors that influence your decision, the less anxiety you'll have about it. So let's get started. One of the things that you'll hear from schools is that they review applications holistically. Holistically means that they're reviewing the entire application. So for schools that review applications this way, it does not come down to just GPA and test score. There are so many other factors that influence. If we look at the screen, you'll see that the things that are concentrated towards the center, the academic record and these other things in blue, those are things that you have control over or you have had control over. You've been shaping them throughout your experience in high school. Most of the things around the outside here are things that you have less control over. And so that's not necessarily the place where you need to focus quite as much. So let's move on and look at the different areas of the application. Each school that you apply to is going to require that they see your academic record. That might be a transcript, you might have to self-report the grades, but they're going to see everything that you've done for the last 4 years academically. And so while they will see your GPA, a lot of the emphasis really is not on those GPAs. It's more on the individual courses, the selections that you've made over 4 years, the general grade trend over 4 years, the course rigor, which means the level of courses that you've taken compared to what is offered to students at Hillsborough, compared to the particular program that you're applying to. And all of those things are kind of looked at in total. So it doesn't just come down to if your GPA is over this number, you're okay, versus if it's below, it's not, because the GPA in itself doesn't tell us anything about your individual course grade, your grade trend, your rigor, or anything else. One of the things schools will also be looking at is to make sure that you've met whatever their minimum requirements are, or perhaps recommended requirements are, in terms of course distribution. So do they require 4 years of math or 3 laboratory sciences? You'll need to check those things before you apply. Now is a great time to start doing that because you're working on your senior schedule. Your senior schedule does matter. Schools will see when you apply what courses you are registered for. Later in the year, many of the schools will require mid-year grades, and so they'll be seeing what your grades are at the midpoint. What is important at that point is not necessarily their influence on your GPA, which is truly minimal at that point because it's only counting in as half of the course value. So we're talking about 15 credits worth of a GPA compared to the 110 that you already have, so very small impact. But what matters more is how you're doing in the courses that you're taking. You want to make some smart choices about what you're going to take. Make sure that you're taking the courses that are related to your program of study in college. If you have a particular major in mind, you want to be challenging, but also balanced and maintainable. So it's really kind of figuring out what that right point is for you. And it may not be the same as the right point for your friends. So keep that in mind as you're scheduling. The next area is testing, and there'll be a whole video about this, so I'm not going to speak too long on it. The short of it is that there is still movement towards test optional for most schools for the class of 2022. Changes are happening every day, so what the list looks like now will be very different than what the list looks like in June. My gut is that most schools are going to still be test optional next year. I think the most likely exceptions are the Florida public schools, the public universities, which were not test optional this year either. And I think it's possible that perhaps the military academies may not be test optional as well. But I think that's probably going to be the bulk of it. Know that you can make a decision for each individual school, what you want to do, if you want to send your scores or not. Just because you took them doesn't, for the most part, mean that you need to send them. So you do have the opportunity to make intentional choices. If you do submit your scores to a given school, it is going to be submitted or considered. However, if you choose not to submit them, then for a test optional school, they're not considered, which means the rest of that academic decision really comes down to the things that were presented on the school transcript. So it kind of shifts some of the academic weight into that area as opposed to balancing them across these two areas. So the decision about whether to submit or not depends upon the student and this particular school. Letters of recommendation. The short version here is that Some schools do not consider recommendations at all. Rutgers, Penn State, many of the larger schools, no recommendations are allowed to be submitted, so that's not a piece of their evaluation. For other schools, it tends to be one counselor letter recommendation, and your counselor will focus on your overall performance, your character, any special circumstances, things that might have influenced your course selection. That goes in the counselor letter. You'll have some opportunity to provide input there. Teacher recommendations will have you ask two teachers, and what your teachers are focusing in on is what you're like in the classroom setting. Are you a participator? How have you been reacting over the past year if you've been virtual? How have you been doing? You want to be choosing teachers who know you best, not always the place where you got that easy A, but somebody who is really going to have something to say about you in your letter of recommendation. Then we've got an essay and supplements. Most students tend to have one main essay that they'll use for a good portion of their schools. We'll work on that in school. It's part of the fourth marking period English curriculum. It's a longer piece where you're exploring something personal to you. However, many schools also require additional essays. Those tend to be more of an emphasis on fit for the particular place. So just like you're looking for the right fit, so are they. So they're looking to find out perhaps, why are you interested in this school? Why this particular major? They're looking for you to relate you and your background to perhaps their mission statements or their motto. They're very intentional. The topics very much reflect the school and what they are looking for. So those are, you might be able to reuse little pieces of them, or you might have the same theme that you kind of are using in all of them, but the essays themselves are very customized for each specific school. So that's something to keep in mind as you're putting your list together. And not overwhelming yourself with schools that are going to require so many supplements. The most selective schools tend to have the most supplements. Extracurricular activities. So this is where a school gets to know more about you and what's important to you and how you spend your time. When I talk about extracurriculars, it's really just everything you do outside of class. And that can include kind of the traditional clubs and sports, but also work, volunteering, home responsibilities are really important to convey as well. Give some thought to how you've pivoted over the last year. Maybe you're in the same organizations and we've moved things to be virtual and you're doing different things because of it, and the structure of the organization has changed. Maybe you've dropped some of those things and you've picked up some things maybe a little bit more personally, or you've started working or taking on a larger role at home. Start to think about that now, because that would be important to convey on your application. There's no magic formula or number of check boxes that you need to check for each area here in terms of what you have to be admitted. Schools are really looking to know more about you and what your interests are and really what your passions are. The main themes of what they're looking for tend to be things like commitment, leadership, responsibility, impact on others. And so all of the different areas there that you see up top as examples could have those things. It's just a matter of how you convey that. But it is very helpful for a school to learn about these things in their application. They get a better idea of how are you going to be involved on their campus. What kind of role will you play there? Other parts of the application that tend to influence the decision, special or unique talents, perhaps in art or music or athletics. Those things may play a role in admission, especially if you are applying to certain programs. Some of those programs for art or music may also require an audition or portfolio. That can often be the most important part of the application process, especially if you're applying to a BFA program, Bachelor's of Fine Art. For other students, they may be able to still submit audition or portfolio, even if they're not applying as a major, if it's just kind of another piece of letting the school know more about them, but it depends upon the school. Then we have interviews. Interviews are not nearly so widespread as they used to be. In general, schools that offer interviews tend to be smaller schools, as well as some of the very highly selective schools will invite a certain number of students to interview. Some of those will be with school personnel. Sometimes it's with upper class students at the university. Sometimes it's alums. In general, interviews, I find they are unlikely to hurt a student's application. They're more likely to kind of be somewhere in the middle or perhaps help it a little bit. But really, it's not a matter of like it's going to put a big plus or gold star on your application. It's more likely to just help them flesh out some more parts of you that you may not have gotten across as clearly as you would have wanted to in writing. Then we've got demonstrated interest, which is taking a larger role at some schools and a very small role at other schools. What demonstrated interest is it helps the school to get an idea about how likely you are to enroll if you were to be accepted. So they would, for the most part, like to offer acceptances to students who want to enroll, because it allows them to accept fewer students if they know you're going to come. And so some good indicators are that you've been engaging with them. So you've visited on campus, or you've been attending virtual programming. You've engaged by communicating with the admissions officer. You've been opening emails. You've been engaging in social media. Those are all great ways to show demonstrated interest. So then we get to kind of the other outside factors, school and major choice. So for some schools, they're admitting by the program that you're applying to, the specific major. Other times it's the school, like the School of Business, and that could change how selective the criteria are or where they're putting different emphasis. Also, how you apply, early decision, early action, regular decision can affect the decision. So those are two things that you can kind of control. But the rest of these things really depend upon the school and their institutional priorities. Are they looking to grow programs, shrink other programs? Are they looking for more out-of-state students, or kind of what are their priorities? Are they looking to grow certain student populations? It's important to them to have a balanced enrollment as well. So, hope that gives you a little bit more detail. I will be going into more detail on some of these areas, and then we'll do also some shorter videos on specifics as we move into the beginning of the application process. Next up, though, we'll talk about testing.